Studio, welcome to Twist of Revenge, a place where we tell stories not of explosions or superheroes, but of something far more powerful, what we carry in our hearts. If stories about love, regret, and second chances speak to you, we invite you to subscribe. Every story here is a quiet journey towards something you may have lost or forgotten. Today's story is titled, "My Father Stepped Between Me and Danger, and His Final Words Broke Me." Let's begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, a regular Tuesday. I used to believe that dads were supposed to be loud. The kind who slam doors when they are angry, who yell from across the house, who insist they know best about everything from football to finances. My father wasn't like that. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. And to be honest, he wasn't someone I thought much about at all. We lived in the same house, sure, but like so many grown sons and their aging fathers, we were close only by square footage, not by heart. He was the kind of man who rose before the sun, made his coffee in silence, and left for work before I even stumbled into the kitchen. He drove an old blue truck that coughed every morning in protest, wore the same brown boots every day of my childhood, and owned exactly 2 coats, one for cold, one for colder. He never said, "I love you," never missed a bill, never missed a shift, and never once asked me how I was doing, not really. So I stopped expecting him to. To me, he was a background figure, necessary but unremarkable, like a lamp in the corner of the room you never turn on. You know it's there, but you don't notice it until the room goes dark. Back then, I was 22, angry for reasons I couldn't quite name. I thought I deserved more in life, though I couldn't say what more meant. I worked part-time at a warehouse, crashed with my parents until I saved up, and spent most of my evenings scrolling through my phone, quietly resenting the life I hadn't built yet. My father never asked when I'd move out, but every now and then he'd place a fresh roll of quarters by my laundry basket. I don't know why that detail sticks with me, but it does. We barely talked, and when we did, it was awkward, like 2 strangers stuck at a bus stop in the rain. "You eat yet?" "Yeah." "All right then." That was the whole script. But one ordinary Tuesday morning, he walked past me in the hallway and said, "Your back tire's low." It was the first sentence he had spoken to me in 3 days. I didn't look up from my phone. "It's fine," I said flatly. He didn't argue. He never did. He just kept walking. I didn't know it then, but that would be one of the last times I saw him standing tall. The next time I saw him, he would be lying in a hospital bed, broken, bruised, and dying, because he had thrown himself in front of me to stop a man with a crowbar. But we're not there yet. No, this was still the before I knew who my father really was, before I understood what love could look like when it didn't come dressed in hugs or birthday cards or pep talks. This was just a regular Tuesday. The kind you forget until it's the day everything begins to change. Next time in Chapter 2, what my father never said, the silence in our house begins to crack, and I learned that sometimes love doesn't come in words, it comes in warnings we ignore. If you felt something stir in you while listening, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this one are more than tales, they are reminders. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear this today. Chapter 2, what my father never said. The day after he told me about the tire, I came home late. There was some drama with a guy at work who thought I was moving too slow unloading pallets. We had words. I left early. Didn't feel like explaining it to anyone, not that anyone asked. When I walked through the door, the house smelled like laundry detergent and overcooked rice. My mother was already asleep on the couch with the TV still humming. My father wasn't around. I noticed the porch light was still on. He always turned it off by 10. I went to the kitchen for a drink, and that's when I saw it. A small piece of paper folded in half, sitting under the salt shaker. My name was scribbled on the front. Inside was a receipt from the gas station. New tire, $84.75, paid in cash, no note, no explanation, just the receipt. I stood there holding it in my hand like it weighed 100 pounds. He hadn't said a word about it, didn't wait around for me to notice. Didn't even make a point to say I took care of it. Just did it quietly, like he always did. I wanted to feel grateful. I really did. But instead, I felt irritated. Because in that moment, it felt like charity. Like he was reminding me that I still needed him. That no matter how old I was, I still couldn't take care of the basics. And I hated that feeling. I hated it more than I hated myself for letting the tire get that low. So instead of saying thank you, I crumpled the receipt and tossed it in the trash. Petty, probably. But when you're 22 and angry at the world, pettiness feels like control. That weekend, we ate dinner in silence. Mom made her usual Sunday meatloaf. Dad took 2 slices. I took 1. He passed me the ketchup without asking. I didn't say thank you. He didn't seem to notice. After dinner, he disappeared into the garage like he always did. That was his sanctuary. A place full of tools that hadn't been used in years, old fishing rods he never had time for anymore, and a radio that only played baseball games and sad country music. I followed him, not really sure why. He was hunched over the workbench, fixing the latch on an old toolbox. The garage smelled like oil and old cardboard. "Why did you do that?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Do what?" "The tire, you didn't have to." He tightened a screw slow and deliberate. "Didn't do it because I had to." I leaned against the wall. "Yeah, well, I don't need you fixing things for me." He looked at me then, just for a second, then back at the latch. "You're right," he said. "You don't." The silence after that wasn't angry. It wasn't even awkward. It was something else, something heavier. "I'm not a kid anymore," I added. He nodded. "I know." I waited for him to say more, a speech maybe, some fatherly wisdom about responsibility or growing up, but he didn't. He just picked up a rag, wiped his hands, and turned off the radio. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in months, and it was barely 6 sentences. I walked out of the garage before he did. The next morning he left before dawn, as usual. But this time he left the tire pressure gauge on the kitchen table. I don't know why, but I took it with me. Chapter 3. The trouble I didn't see coming. The first time I saw them, it was a Thursday. I had taken the long way home, cutting through the parking lot behind the old bowling alley, trying to clear my head after another shift of being yelled at by a manager barely older than me. The alley had closed down 2 years ago, but the lot still served as a hangout for all kinds of people with nowhere else to be. That's where I saw them. 3 guys leaning against the rusted dumpster, passing around a bottle in a brown paper bag like it was communion. I didn't think much of it. I'd seen them before, or at least guys like them. Loose jeans, cracked knuckles, that jittery kind of laughter that never quite sounds human. The type of people who don't start fights, exactly, but don't walk away from them either. I kept walking. I didn't look at them. I didn't say a word, but I guess that wasn't enough. "Hey," one of them barked. "You deaf?" I turned just enough to catch the smirk on his face. There was nothing casual about it. "What, you got a problem with us?" he asked, stepping forward. "You've been walking by here all week like you own the sidewalk." I blinked, confused. "I don't even know you, man." He smiled wide, too wide. "Good. Then you won't mind if I remind you where you stand." The next few seconds felt like slow motion. One of the other guys tossed his bottle behind him. It shattered against the pavement. Another cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked fast, then faster. I heard them laugh behind me. One of them yelled something I didn't catch, and I didn't turn around to ask. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart still pounding long after the threat had passed. It wasn't the fear that unsettled me. It was the feeling of being hunted, of being seen by someone I hadn't even noticed, like I'd wandered into a game I didn't know I was playing. I didn't tell my dad. He was already asleep when I got home, the TV flickering silently across his tired face. My mother had left a note about leftovers in the fridge. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, thinking maybe I should wake him, say something, ask him what. What would I even say? Dad, I made eye contact with the wrong guy, and now I'm afraid to take my usual shortcut. He wouldn't laugh. That wasn't his way, but I pictured his eyes narrowing, that quiet disapproval of his, not because he thought less of me, but because he thought more. That was somehow worse. So I went to bed, didn't sleep much, and in the morning I took a different route to work. For the next few days, nothing happened. I avoided the back lot. I kept my head down. I took no chances. But on Monday, my friend Dylan asked if I wanted to shoot hoops behind the rec center after work. We used to go every week before schedules got messy and life got louder. I figured it was time to say yes. We played for an hour, talked trash, sweated out the stress. It felt good, almost normal, until I walked back to my car. They were waiting, not all three, just the tall one, the smirker. He was leaning against the driver's side door of my beat-up sedan like he owned it. "Hey," he said calmly, "remember me?" I froze. "Relax," he said. "I just wanna talk." That was a lie. I knew it. He knew it. But I was alone, and it was dark, and every option in my brain sounded worse than the last. I took a step back. "I don't want trouble." "Yeah," he said, standing up straight, cracking his neck. "But sometimes trouble wants you." That's when I heard the second voice behind me this time. Kids should have stayed out of our way. I turned. The second guy had a pipe, not raised, not yet, but ready. They weren't going to talk. I braced myself, fists clenched, feet spread. Every stupid fight movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. But I wasn't ready. Not really. Not for them. And definitely not for what happened next. Because that's when a car screeched up beside us. That old blue truck. The door flung open and out stepped my father. No words, no shouting, just motion. He walked straight into the middle of it, between me and them, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Chapter 4. The line he drew. He didn't say my name. Didn't ask what was happening. Didn't even look at me. He just stepped between us, me and the two guys who were suddenly a whole lot less smug than they'd been a second ago. My father was not a big man. He was built like the work he did, compact, quiet, stubborn. His arms weren't for throwing punches. They were for carrying lumber, fixing fences, lifting a tired child from a car seat at the end of a long day. But in that moment, standing in the amber wash of a cracked parking lot light, he looked like something immovable, something you didn't want to test. The guy with the pipe spoke first. "This ain't your business, old man." My father looked at him like he was inspecting a leaking pipe under the sink, calm, unimpressed, quietly assessing just how much damage had already been done. Then he said, without raising his voice, "It is now." Just 3 words, and suddenly, the pipe guy's fingers twitched like he was thinking twice. The tall one stepped forward. "You think we're scared of you?" "No," my dad said. "I think you're used to picking on kids who are too polite to fight back." Silence. For a second, no one moved, and then the one with the pipe lunged. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember how fast it happened. Just the sound of the metal hitting something solid, not a body, at least not at first. My dad had seen it coming. He grabbed the edge of the car door and slammed it forward, knocking the guy sideways. The pipe clattered to the ground. I rushed in instinctively, fists up, but my dad barked, "Stay back." That's when the other one moved. He had a chain. I didn't see it at first until it caught the light as he swung it like a whip. My father turned to block me, hands up. It struck him across the shoulder and I heard a sound come out of him, a sharp, guttural grunt I'd never heard before, like the wind getting knocked out of a man's soul. "Dad," I rushed toward him, but he raised one hand without looking, still shielding me. That's when they both came at him. There's a moment that happens in every fight right before it explodes, when time slows and you suddenly see the people in front of you not as threats but as boys. Angry, confused boys in men's clothing swinging at the world because it never swung back kindly. And then it all snapped into motion. I don't remember much. There was shouting. I think someone called for help. Tires screeched. Headlights flooded the lot. And when I could finally breathe again, the two guys were running. One limping, the other swearing into the dark. My father was on the ground, not moving. The chain lay nearby like a dead snake, and his left arm was bent in a way that no arm should bend. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. "Dad," I dropped beside him. "Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered, open, then closed, then open again. He looked at me, but not really, like he was trying to see through me to something behind. "Don't move," I whispered. My voice was shaking. "It's okay, I'm calling for help. Just don't move, okay?" He didn't nod, but he didn't try to get up either. When the ambulance arrived, I rode with him, holding his hand the whole way, even when they told me I might be in the way. At one point, the EMT asked me, "He your dad?" I said yes. And the EMT just said, "Then you better be proud. That man just took a beating meant for you." I couldn't speak, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I hadn't been proud. Not in a long time. Not until now, chapter 5. The things I couldn't say in the ER. Hospitals have a smell. It's not the sharp scent of antiseptic they try to convince you it is, it's something deeper. A mixture of anxiety, rubber, cafeteria grease, and something faintly metallic that clings to the back of your throat. I sat alone in the emergency room, elbows on knees, hands clasped like I was praying, though I didn't know how. Not anymore. The nurse had told me they were working on him. She said it calmly, like it was routine, like men who collapse in parking lots with shattered shoulders and blood in their hair were just another Tuesday. I stared at the double doors he disappeared behind, willing them to open. There's a unique helplessness that comes from watching the strongest person you know be reduced to silence and wires and hurried footsteps around a gurney. It does something to your insides, unroots things, scrambles everything you thought you were sure of. The receptionist asked me to fill out paperwork. I wrote David Merritt in shaky letters, age 58. Emergency contact me, and I froze at the next line, relationship to patient. I stared at it too long, not because I didn't know the answer, but because suddenly that word, son, felt heavier than it ever had before. When the doors finally opened, a doctor came out, young, tired, his scrubs wrinkled like he'd slept in them. His face was kind, but his eyes were honest. "He's stable," he said. "Multiple fractures in the shoulder and upper arm, deep tissue bruising across the ribs. He took some serious hits. No internal bleeding that we can see, but we'll keep monitoring." "Will he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The doctor nodded gently. "He'll be okay, he's tough. You can see him soon, give them a few more minutes." I nodded, though I already stood. I couldn't sit anymore. When they let me in, the room was dim and quiet except for the steady beeping of a monitor that seemed to mock the pace of my own heartbeat. My dad lay there, pale under the fluorescent light. One arm was bandaged and strapped tight across his chest. A bruise bloomed dark across his cheekbone. His lips were dry, his breathing shallow. He looked small, not weak, just smaller than I remembered. I sat in the chair beside his bed and didn't speak, because I didn't know how to say what was crowding my chest. Things like, "I'm sorry I never said thank you for the tire. I'm sorry I always assumed you didn't care. I'm sorry it took you nearly dying for me to realize you were always there. And most of all, I love you. I've always loved you, even when I didn't know it." But those words, they sat like rocks in my throat. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand gently on his. It was calloused, familiar. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw his fingers twitch back in response. His eyes fluttered open just a crack. "Dad," I leaned in. His lips moved barely. The words were dry, almost inaudible. "You okay?" he whispered. I laughed through a sudden rush of tears. "You took a pipe for me and you're asking if I'm okay." His mouth tugged upward, half a smile, half a wince. "That's what dads do," he said. And then he closed his eyes again, resting. But those 4 words stayed with me. That's what dads do. I sat there for hours, watching him breathe, listening to the monitor, and wondering how many times in my life he had stepped between me and danger I never even saw. Chapter 6. The Man in the Garage. He didn't wake up again that night. The nurses assured me that was normal, that his body needed rest more than anything. But I still sat there long after visiting hours ended, long after my mother had called twice, her voice trembling as I told her he was stable. She offered to come down. I told her to rest. I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I needed to be alone with the weight of it all. I drove home in the dark, the roads too quiet, my thoughts too loud. Every traffic light felt like a pause button I didn't ask for. At every red light, my eyes filled again, and I had to blink hard just to see. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller. Not physically, but in meaning, like some part of its foundation had shifted in my mind. And I noticed something I'd never noticed before. The garage light was on. Out of habit or something deeper, I walked over and opened the door. It was warm inside, musty with the smell of old oil and dust and pine. My father's world. And for the first time in my life, I stepped into it not as someone passing through, but as someone looking for answers. The workbench was cluttered but not messy. Everything had a purpose. Nails sorted by size in baby food jars. Wrenches hung with care. A rag soaked with something dark and dry, folded over a hammer. I stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what I was looking for, only that I had to see it, to feel closer to him, to stand in a space where he had been fully himself. That's when I noticed the box. It sat under the bench, tucked behind a stack of sandpaper and an old lunchbox. A weathered plastic storage bin with a lid that didn't quite snap closed. Inside were papers, manuals, warranties, receipts, and notebooks. I lifted one out and opened it. My breath caught. Each page was dated, neatly, almost obsessively, but this wasn't a journal, it was a record of me. First job interview helped him iron his shirt. Graduation, he didn't want to walk, I made him. Dentist bill covered it, didn't tell him. Fender bender paid deductible, told him it was the shop's discount. Tire March 3rd, didn't say anything, didn't want to embarrass him. Each line was short, blunt, but the tenderness screamed through the ink. I flipped through more pages, thought about saying I'm proud of you tonight, should've, maybe tomorrow. I sat on the stool and just held the book in my lap. It trembled in my hands, or maybe I was trembling. He had never said much. But here, in this garage, under a bare bulb and a film of sawdust, he had written everything. I found another notebook. This one had loose sketches, a ramp for my mother's knees, a birdhouse design I vaguely remembered him building one summer, a to-do list that included fix the squeaky step before he trips on it again. I didn't even know he noticed the step. I didn't know he noticed anything, but he had every detail, every misstep, every need I never voiced. He had seen it all, and quietly filled in the gaps without asking for thanks or even acknowledgement. I sat there until the sun began to bleed through the edge of the garage window, thinking of all the things he'd done in silence, and all the noise I had made, believing he'd never shown up for me. Turns out, I just never knew where to look. Chapter 7. The Promise I Made Before Dawn. The birds were just beginning their morning chatter when I finally left the garage. I hadn't meant to stay there all night. But somehow, leaving that space felt like walking away from him, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. I went inside quietly, careful not to wake my mother. The kitchen was still the same. The hum of the old refrigerator, the chipped ceramic mug on the counter, the faint scent of burnt toast from mornings past somehow still hanging in the air. It was strange how normal everything looked while the world was quietly cracking open. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there in the dark, thinking about the man who had moved through this space every day like clockwork. The man I had ignored more often than I cared to admit. The man I now realized had been holding up more than the roof of this house. He had been holding up me. I remembered the notebook entries, the tire, the step, the dentist bill. The quiet should have said I'm proud, scribbled like a secret. There's a kind of shame that doesn't come with a shout but with a whisper. And I heard it now. It wasn't regret like lightning. It was slow and aching like rain that seeps into everything and makes it heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the surface where we'd eaten hundreds of dinners in silence, and I whispered into the stillness, "I'm sorry." It wasn't loud, it wasn't poetic, it was just honest, and I said it again, and again, not for forgiveness, but for acknowledgement that I had failed to see him, that I had looked for love in speeches, not in sacrifice, that I had been blind to the kind of man who never asked to be noticed. The sun finally breached the horizon, spilling soft gold across the floor, and in that light I made a promise. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, just a quiet knowing inside me that the world couldn't go back to how it was. I promised to stay by his side, for as long as it took. For every surgery, every hard day, every recovery, for every moment he had shown up without asking. I would now show up without being asked. I didn't know how long he would be in the hospital. I didn't know what the damage would look like. But I knew this. He had stepped between me and danger without hesitation. The least I could do was step between him and loneliness. That morning, I packed a bag with the basics, clean clothes, his crossword book, the aftershave he always used but never bought for himself. I added a photo I found tucked behind a drawer, me, maybe 6 or 7, on his shoulders at the county fair. I don't remember the day, but the look on his face in that photo, half tired, half proud, made my throat close. At 7:40 a.m., I walked back into the hospital room. He was still asleep, his breathing steadier, the bruising on his face a little darker now, a little more real. I placed the bag on the chair beside him and sat down. Then I reached for his hand. He didn't stir, but I held it anyway, because love, I was starting to learn, isn't about the moment they open their eyes. Sometimes it's about being there when they don't. Chapter 8. The Silence Between Heartbeats. Hospitals have a strange way of measuring time. It's not in hours or minutes or the shifting light through the blinds. It's in the rhythm of machines, the slow drip of Roman IV fluid, the the soft footfalls of nurses, the rise and fall of a chest you never realized meant everything to you, until now. I had never spent this much time in silence with my father. At home, our silence used to mean distance. Here, it meant presence. He was still unconscious for most of that day. The doctors said it wasn't a coma, just the body doing what it had to, shutting things down so it could rebuild. I sat by his side and listened to the quiet. And in that quiet, things came back to me. I remembered the time he stood in the cold for over an hour outside my middle school because I forgot my trombone and didn't answer my phone. I had been embarrassed, not grateful. I never even said thank you. I remembered the dent in the side of my first car, the one I told everyone I got from a parking lot. But really, I had clipped the mailbox while texting. That night, while I slept, he had bent over it in the driveway with tools and touch-up paint until it was nearly invisible. I remembered the time I got food poisoning the day before prom. I couldn't even stand. He stayed up with me all night, holding a trash can, wiping my face, whispering, "You'll be okay," over and over. And then he still went to work at 5 a.m. like he always did. He never called those things sacrifices. He just called them part of being a dad. I glanced over at him. His face looked softer in sleep, less lined, almost boyish. And I wondered how many times he had sat like this beside me. How many nights I had been the one unconscious, or sick or helpless, and he had just been there, not asking, not waiting for praise, just there. The nurse came in to check his vitals. She smiled gently when she saw me. "He's lucky to have you here," she said. I almost laughed. "No," I replied. "I'm the lucky one, I just didn't know it." She nodded and left. I turned back to him and whispered, "I think I'm starting to understand you, Dad, not all the way, but more than I ever did before." His hand didn't move, but the heart monitor beeped steadily like a metronome. A quiet reminder that something was still fighting inside him. I reached into the bag I'd packed and pulled out the old crossword puzzle book. I flipped to a page that was half finished and read the clue out loud. 17 across, consistent, dependable, rarely celebrated 7 letters. I smiled to myself. Answer, steady. I looked at him again. You would have nailed that one. Outside, the sun shifted across the window and the light landed on his face. I thought about how many moments like this I had missed, how many more I might never get. So I leaned in, and in the quiet space between heartbeats, I whispered something I should have said years ago. "I see you now." Chapter 9. When he finally opened his eyes, it was just past midnight when he stirred. I dozed off in the chair beside his bed, my neck bent at an unforgiving angle, a hospital blanket draped across my lap like some token of comfort that didn't quite do the job. The room was dim, lit only by a single low lamp and the soft, ceaseless rhythm of the heart monitor. Then I heard it, a rustling, small like the sound of someone shifting on a church pew. I opened my eyes, groggy, disoriented, and looked toward the bed. His fingers were moving. Then slowly his eyes opened, not wide, not dramatically, just enough to remind me he was still here. "Dad," I stood up too fast, the blanket tumbling to the floor. "Hey, can you hear me?" His lips parted, dry, cracked. He tried to say something, but only a hoarse whisper came out. I leaned in, lowering my voice like you do in places where reverence is instinct. "It's okay. You're in the hospital. You're safe." He blinked slowly. Then with great effort, he turned his head slightly toward me. "You're still here," he rasped. I almost laughed through the tightness in my chest. "Yeah, I'm here." His mouth curved into a soft shape that might have been a smile or might have been pain. Probably both. For a long time, we didn't say anything. There was no need to. He was back. That was enough for now. The nurse came in a few minutes later. She was calm, efficient, and smiled when she saw his eyes open. "Well, look who decided to rejoin us," she said gently, checking his vitals, noting numbers on a clipboard. My father didn't respond. He just kept watching me. After she left, I pulled my chair closer. "I found your notebooks," I said almost shyly. "In the garage." His brow furrowed. "What notebooks?" "The ones under the bench, the ones about me." He closed his eyes, not in pain, more like resignation. "You weren't supposed to see those," he murmured. "I'm glad I did," I said. "They said everything you never said out loud." He opened his eyes again and looked at me. Not through me, not past me. At me. "They were just reminders," he said. "I wanted to remember the things I got right, since I figured you'd remember everything I got wrong." That hit harder than I expected. "You didn't get it wrong," I said quietly. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. "I thought you hated me," he said after a moment, his voice barely audible. I shook my head. "I didn't hate you, I didn't understand you." He nodded faintly. "That's fair." There was a pause, then in a voice cracked from dryness but heavy with meaning, he whispered, "I was scared, most of the time. That surprised me." "You?" I asked. "You never seemed scared of anything." "I was scared of getting it wrong," he said. "Scared that one day you'd grow up and become a man I didn't recognize, and it would be my fault." I leaned back, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "I was scared of that too," I admitted. Another silence passed between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the years we'd spent avoiding conversations that should have happened long ago. Finally, I reached out and took his hand. This time, he didn't just twitch his fingers, he held on, tightly, like someone anchoring himself to shore. And then, without letting go, he said something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. "I didn't step in front of them because I had to, son." He looked me straight in the eye. "I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of this world without you in it." And that's when the tears came. Not because he'd said something poetic, but because, for the first time in my life, I understood exactly what he meant. Chapter 9. When he finally opened his eyes, it was just past midnight when he stirred. I had been half asleep in the chair, my body bent into awkward angles when I heard the faintest sound, like someone shifting under heavy blankets. I looked up. His fingers moved, then his eyelids, and slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes. "Dad," my voice cracked before I even realized it. I stood so quickly the blanket fell to the floor. "Hey, can you hear me?" His lips parted, dry and thin. The words came out as a rasp. "You're still here." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm here." He tried to smile, but it twisted with pain. His eyes stayed on mine, though, and that was enough. The nurse slipped in, calm and practiced. "Well, look who's back," she said, checking his vitals with a soft smile, but he barely looked at her. His gaze never left me. After she left, I dragged my chair closer. I hesitated before speaking. "I found your notebooks in the garage." His brow furrowed. "Notebooks? The ones under the bench. About me." He closed his eyes, not in pain, but as if admitting something. "You weren't supposed to see those." "I'm glad I did," I said. My throat tightened. "They said everything you never said." He let out a long, slow breath. "They were just reminders. I wrote down the things I got right because I figured you'd remember everything I got wrong." The words split something inside me. "You didn't get it wrong," I whispered. He looked at me, weak but steady. "I thought you hated me." I shook my head, tears burning. "No, I didn't hate you, I didn't understand you." He nodded faintly. "That's fair." Silence stretched between us, full, not empty. A silence that held years of words never spoken. Finally, he tightened his fingers around mine. His grip was weaker than I remembered, but deliberate. "I didn't step in front of them because I had to, son." His voice was fragile, but it carried. He locked eyes with me. I did it because I couldn't imagine this world without you in it. And that was when the tears broke free, not because the words were grand, but because, for the first time, I finally understood my father. Chapter 10. The last story he ever told me. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of the monitor and the distant shuffle of nurses at their station. My father's hand was still holding mine, and though his grip trembled, he wouldn't let go. "There's something you don't know," he whispered, his voice raw, each word climbing uphill. I leaned closer, afraid to miss a single syllable. "What is it, Dad?" He took a breath that sounded heavier than it should have been. His eyes flickered toward the ceiling as though the memory lived somewhere up there. "When you were 12, he began slowly. You remember how we almost lost the house?" I nodded. I remembered the tension, the arguments whispered behind closed doors, my mother crying quietly in the kitchen. I remembered thinking it was her fault or maybe his, but I never asked. "You thought it was because of me," he said, "because I didn't make enough." My throat tightened. He wasn't wrong. "But the truth is," he continued, "I signed papers for your uncle. He came to me desperate, said he'd lose everything if I didn't co-sign his loan. I thought family meant stepping in, even when it cost you." He paused, eyes closing as if the weight of that choice still pressed on him, all these years later. "He walked away," my father whispered, "left me with the debt. I took extra shifts, worked weekends, slept in the truck sometimes just so you and your mother could stay here in this house. I never told you because I didn't want you to carry it. I felt the burn of shame rising in me, shame for every time I had thrown the word failure at him under my breath. Dad," my voice cracked, "why didn't you ever say anything?" His eyes turned back to mine, steady despite the weakness in his body. "Because love isn't about keeping score," he said. "It's about carrying the weight even when nobody sees." I couldn't speak. He went on, slower now, his breath shorter between words. "And when I stood in that parking lot when those men came at you, it wasn't courage, son. It was the same thing, just love. The kind that doesn't think. The kind that steps forward before you even realize your feet are moving." His grip tightened around my hand with surprising strength. "I need you to know," he said, voice breaking but firm, "every sacrifice was worth it. Every bruise, every bill, every hour I didn't sleep. Worth it because it meant you had a chance at more than I ever did." The tears came hot and fast, spilling onto the sheets. I pressed my forehead against his hand. "I didn't see it, Dad. All these years I didn't see it." He exhaled slowly, and a faint smile ghosted across his bruised face. "You see it now," he whispered. And with that his eyes closed again, not in death, not yet, but in a rest so deep it felt like the ending of a story only he could have told, the last story, the one I would carry forever. Chapter 11, The Weight of Goodbye. The night after he told me his story, I couldn't leave the hospital. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured his face, the lines of pain carved deep, the bruises blooming dark, the way his hand tightened around mine when he forced the truth out of himself like a man unburdening his soul before the end. I didn't want that to be the last thing, so I stayed. The chair was stiff, the blanket too thin, but none of that mattered. I just wanted to be there for the moment he woke again, or if he didn't. By morning, his breathing had grown shallower. Not alarming yet, the nurses said, but different. Fragile. I tried not to hear what they weren't saying. Sometimes, one of them whispered to me in the hallway, "People hold on until they've said what they need to say." I knew what she meant, and it terrified me. When I went back into the room, I sat down and watched him sleep. The heart monitor ticked along, steady but slow, like a drummer winding down a song. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it, the world without him. No early morning coffee smell. No boots by the back door. No quiet man fixing what no one else noticed was broken. I thought about all the times I'd wanted him to be someone louder, someone more obvious, someone who said all the things I craved to hear. And now I realized I'd give anything to have him exactly as he was. Quiet, steady, present. I leaned close, unsure if he could hear me. My voice trembled as it left me. Dad, I don't know if you're still fighting in there. I don't know how much longer you've got. But I need you to know everything you carried, I see it now. Every sacrifice, every hour, every bruise you took for me, I see it. And I'm sorry it took me so long. My throat closed and I pressed my forehead against the bed rail. I love you, I whispered. I always did, I just didn't know how to say it. His hand twitched, just enough to let me know he'd heard. And in that moment I understood what the nurse meant. Goodbye doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in a silence you can feel. I sat back down, tears drying on my face, and waited. Waited for another word. Waited for another breath. Waited for something I wasn't ready to lose but knew I couldn't keep forever. Chapter 12. The last breath between us. It happened in the stillness of a Sunday afternoon. The world outside the window went on as usual, cars moving along the street, the faint laughter of children in a park nearby, sunlight spilling across the blinds. Life kept happening, indifferent to the way mine was about to break. Inside the room, everything slowed. My father stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. His eyes found mine, heavy but searching, as if he had been waiting for me to be there. Dad, I whispered, taking his hand quickly. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. His lips moved, cracked and dry, and I leaned close until I could feel his breath against my cheek. Son, he rasped, pausing for strength, don't carry what I carried. I frowned, trying to hold back the tears rising again. What do you mean? He swallowed, each word costing him more than it should have. All those years, I thought love meant sacrifice in silence. I never told you how proud I was. I thought showing up was enough. His voice cracked. But you deserve to hear it. You deserve the words too. My chest tightened and I nodded quickly, desperate for him not to spend another ounce of strength regretting. You showed me, Dad, in every way that mattered, and I see it now. I see you. His eyes glistened and he pressed my hand weakly, a fragile echo of the strength he once carried. There's one more thing, he whispered. His gaze grew distant, as if he were staring through time itself. When you were born, I held you in my arms and promised I would never let this world take you from me. Today, I kept that promise. I shook my head, choking on the ache in my throat. No, Dad, don't talk like that. You're still here. We still have time. But he smiled, small, tired, but at peace. Time is borrowed, he murmured. Love is what we leave behind. The monitor beeped steadily, then slower, each sound a countdown I wasn't ready to hear. I bent over, my forehead resting against his, my tears falling onto the sheets between us. I love you, I whispered again, urgent this time, as if I could keep him tethered with the words alone. And with the faintest breath, softer than a sigh, he answered, I love you too. The beeping slowed, then stopped. And in that still, unbearable quiet, I realized my father's last gift wasn't just saving my life. It was giving me the words I had waited my whole life to hear, words that would live inside me long after his breath had gone. Chapter 13. The empty chair beside me. The funeral came 3 days later. It was small, the way he would have wanted. No grand speeches, no overflowing church. Just family, a few neighbors, some old co-workers who remembered the man who fixed more things than anyone could count and asked for nothing in return. They placed his boots beside the casket. worn, brown leather with laces frayed at the tips. Seeing them there broke me in a way the flowers and prayers never could. Those boots had carried him to work every morning before the sun rose, had trudged through snow, rain, and the hot dust of summer. They were the closest thing to a diary he ever kept. I sat in the front row, staring at them, and realized something terrifying. I had no idea how to live without him, not because he had done everything for me, but because he had always been there, even in silence, even in shadow. Now there was just an empty chair beside me. That night, when the house was quiet again, I walked past the garage. The light was off. For the first time in years, the workbench was still. No hum of a radio, no faint clink of tools, just silence. I stepped inside and sat on his stool. The smell of oil and sawdust lingered as if the walls themselves carried his memory. I reached for one of his notebooks again, flipping through pages until I landed on an entry I hadn't noticed before. It was dated only a month earlier. "Son doesn't look at me much these days. That's okay. I'll keep looking at him until he does." The words hit me harder than any blow I'd ever taken. I pressed the notebook to my chest and wept, not quietly this time, not into my sleeve like I had at the hospital. I wept openly, letting the grief crash over me. Because the truth was simple. I had been given love my whole life, and only now did I recognize its shape. The empty chair beside me was not just absence. It was a reminder that someone had once sat there, that someone had once filled it with steady, unspoken devotion. And that now, it was my turn to learn how to sit in it, to carry forward the love that had carried me. Chapter 14, His Lessons in My Hands. Grief can turn you inward. For days I barely spoke. I drifted through the house like a shadow, eating when reminded, sleeping in fits, avoiding calls I didn't want to answer. The world felt muted, as though someone had turned down the volume of life itself. But the one place I kept returning to was the garage. It was there, sitting at his workbench, that I began to feel him again, not in body but in the details he'd left behind. The notebooks, the carefully labeled jars, the small half-finished projects waiting for hands that would never come back to finish them. At first, it made me ache. Then slowly, it began to make me move. I picked up the birdhouse he had been working on. The wood was cut, the nails laid out, the plan sketched in pencil with his steady hand. I stared at it for a long time before reaching for the hammer. The first swing was clumsy, too hard. The nail bent. I cursed under my breath, then laughed softly to myself. "That's not how you do it, is it, Dad?" I tried again, slower this time, more deliberate, and the nail went in straight. Piece by piece the birdhouse came together. By the time I was done, my hands were blistered, but the ache in my chest felt lighter. It wasn't just a birdhouse. It was proof that his lessons hadn't left with him, that they were here in me, waiting to be lived out. I remembered the way he fixed the dent in my car without ever asking for thanks, the way he put coins by the laundry basket when I was broke, the way he stepped between me and danger without thinking twice. And I realized these weren't just acts, they were teachings. Love in his language was a verb, a steady hand, a quiet gesture, a sacrifice no one saw. That night, I carried the birdhouse outside and hung it on the maple tree in the yard. The wood gleamed in the moonlight, rough but solid. I stood there a long time, imagining him watching, arms crossed, that small half-smile he rarely let slip. "I'll carry it now," I whispered into the night, "the way you carried me." And for the first time since he left, I didn't feel crushed by the weight of goodbye. I felt entrusted, like his lessons were no longer in the notebooks. They were in my hands. Chapter 15, Carrying His Promise Forward. After the funeral, People told me the same things they always tell the grieving. Time will heal. He's in a better place. At least you had those last words. They meant well, but grief doesn't bend to clichés. It lingers, it reshapes you, it demands something of you, and for me it demanded a choice. Would I let my father's death hollow me out, or would I let his life fill me in? I started small. The first week I visited my mother every evening after work. I fixed the squeaky step on the porch, the one Dad had circled in his notebook. I didn't just tighten it. I replaced the board entirely, sanding it until it was smooth under my palm. She watched from the doorway, her eyes soft, as if she saw someone else standing in my place. "Looks just like him," she whispered. The next week, I stopped by the community center where my father had once volunteered on weekends. I'd never paid attention before, but he used to patch broken shelves, repair loose chairs, replace the light bulbs no one else bothered with. Quiet work. Work no one applauded. I asked if they needed help. They said yes, there's always something that needs fixing, so I showed up on Saturdays. At first, my hands were clumsy. I bent screws, stripped wires, swore under my breath when things didn't fit right. But little by little, I started to hear him in my head. "Steady, son. Don't rush it. If you want it to last, do it right. Love isn't loud, it's patient." By the third Saturday, the janitor clapped me on the back. "Your old man would be proud." And I believed him. For the first time in years, I wasn't just drifting. I wasn't just filling days with resentment or empty noise. I was carrying something forward, something my father had carried his whole life. One evening, I sat again in the garage, looking at the birdhouse I'd built. A small sparrow had already moved in, its chirps filling the air each morning. I smiled, realizing it wasn't just a home for a bird. It was a sign that even the simplest work, done with steady hands and quiet love, could shelter something fragile. I thought about his last words to me. Love is what we leave behind. And I knew then his promise didn't end in that hospital room. It lived in me now. Every nail I drove, every chair I fixed, every time I chose to love without needing to be seen. It wasn't just his way, it had to become mine. Chapter 16. The life he left in me. It has been a year since the day my father stepped into the street and gave me the gift of his last breath. Grief has not disappeared. It lingers in the corners of my days, like the smell of his aftershave that still clings faintly to his old jacket hanging in the closet. Sometimes it ambushes me, in the sound of boots scuffing across concrete, in the sight of an old blue truck rattling down the road, in the silence of a Sunday dinner where his chair sits empty. But grief has changed. It is no longer just a wound. It is a reminder. Every time I fix something, a broken hinge, a crooked shelf, a loose step, I feel his hands guiding mine. Every time I stop to help someone who doesn't expect it, I feel his quiet voice reminding me, love isn't about being noticed, it's about showing up. I used to think my father and I had wasted so much time in silence. Now I see that silence differently. It wasn't empty, it was steady. It was the sound of a man carrying weight so I wouldn't have to. And though he is gone, that weight is now mine to carry, not as a burden but as a blessing. Because the life he lived, the sacrifices, the love without words, the courage without applause, still lives in me. And that I've learned is how love outlives time. Not in monuments, not in grand gestures, but in the way a son carries forward what a father once carried alone. So I move forward, not unbroken but rebuilt, and every step I take, I carry him with me. Studio, thank you for joining me on this journey. Stories like these are not just mine. They belong to all of us who have loved and lost, who have been shaped by the quiet sacrifices of family. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing so you can hear more stories that remind us what really matters. I wish you health, peace, and the warmth of family. Take care of the ones you love, and may love, in its quietest forms, always find its way back to you.